For 15 years, my mother-in-law's suffocating presence defined our home. But it was only after her death, hidden within the rigid order of her private room, that I uncovered a truth far more devastating than any judgment she'd ever cast. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For 15 years, this home had been filled with the presence of my mother-in-law, Ludmila. It wasn't a warm presence, not the kind that fills a house with the smell of baking and comfortable chatter. No, Ludmila's presence was more like a change in air pressure before a storm. You felt it in your bones, a misplaced cushion, a spoon left by the sink, a laugh that was just a little too loud. Nothing escaped her notice, or her quiet, cutting judgment. My husband, Mark, loved his mother, of course, but even he walked on eggshells, a habit ingrained since childhood. Now she was gone. The funeral was 2 days ago, a somber affair of stiff suits and whispered condolences. Mark was a wreck, hollowed out by a grief that was as complicated as his relationship with her had been. He'd shut himself in his study, leaving me to navigate the suffocating stillness of the house. The task I dreaded yet perversely craved was sorting her room. It felt like the final act, the true exorcism of her ghost. Mark couldn't face it, his face paling at the mere suggestion. "Later, Irina. Just not yet," he'd mumbled. But I knew later would become never. If we were ever going to reclaim this house, to finally make it ours, it had to be done. So with a deep breath, I pushed open the door to her room. It was exactly as she'd left it, a museum to a life lived with rigid discipline. The bed was perfectly made, the porcelain figurines on her dresser stood in a militant line, and the air was thick with the scent of lavender and mothballs. It was suffocating. I started with the closets, bagging up clothes that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. Dreary cardigans, sensible shoes, starched blouses in shades of beige and gray. Each hanger I emptied felt like a small victory, a little bit of air returning to the room. For hours I worked in a trance-like state. I sorted through drawers of neatly folded handkerchiefs, boxes of old photographs of stern-faced ancestors, and enough knitting supplies to outfit a small army. There was nothing personal, nothing that gave a glimpse into the woman behind the iron facade. No love letters, no silly souvenirs, no diaries filled with secret thoughts. It was the curated archive of a life, not the messy, beautiful reality of one. I was just about to give up for the day, my back aching and my hands caked with dust, when I turned to the last piece of furniture, a massive dark wood wardrobe that stood against the far wall like a monolith. It was ancient, a family heirloom Ludmila had been intensely proud of. As I wiped down its polished surface, my cloth snagged on something near the bottom. I knelt, squinting in the dim light. There was a thin, almost invisible seam in the ornate baseboard of the wardrobe. My fingers traced it. It wasn't just a join in the wood. One section felt slightly loose. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was it. This was the kind of thing you read about in novels. With trembling fingers, I pressed and wiggled the piece of wood. It resisted. Then with a soft click, it gave way, revealing a dark, hollow space inside. My breath caught in my throat. Reaching into the cold darkness, my fingers brushed against a small tin box. It was surprisingly heavy. I pulled it out into the light, my pulse hammering in my ears. The lid was stiff with age, but I managed to pry it open with my fingernails. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were just a few items: a tiny worn leather baby shoe, a lock of silky blonde baby hair tied with a blue ribbon, and underneath them, a single yellowed photograph. I picked it up. It was a picture of a beautiful, smiling young woman with kind eyes, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket. The baby was looking right at the camera, a little fist curled by his cheek. And as I stared at that tiny, perfect face, all the air left my lungs. My blood ran cold. I knew that face better than my own. It was my husband, Mark. But the smiling, loving woman holding him in her arms was a complete stranger. My head spun. I sank back on my heels, the dusty floorboards cold against my legs. My gaze darted from the smiling woman in the photograph to the memory of Ludmila's face, a perpetual mask of disapproval. The two couldn't have been more different. The woman in the picture radiated warmth. Her entire being was focused on the tiny baby in her arms, a look of pure, unadulterated love that I had never once seen on Ludmila's features. Ludmila's love for Mark, if you could call it that, had always been conditional, a thing of sharp edges and high expectations. This was something else entirely. This was the love a mother has for her child. The floorboards creaked in the hallway downstairs. Mark, a jolt of pure panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, my movements clumsy and loud in the silent room. I shoved the photograph, the lock of hair, and the tiny shoe back into the tin box, snapped the lid shut, and slid it back into the dark cavity. My fingers fumbled with the wooden panel, trying to click it back into place. It wouldn't fit. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Ira, are you okay up there?" Mark's voice, thick with exhaustion, drifted up the stairs. "Fine, just dropped a box of old papers," I called back, my own voice sounding strained and unnatural to my ears. Finally, with a desperate shove, the panel clicked securely into place, vanishing once more into the ornate woodwork. I stood up, brushing dust from my jeans, my body trembling. I had to get out of that room. I walked downstairs, forcing my face into a neutral expression. Mark was standing at the bottom of the staircase, his eyes shadowed with grief. "You should stop for today," he said softly. "You look pale." I just nodded, unable to trust my voice. The secret I was now carrying felt like a physical weight, a hot, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. That night, I lay awake in bed long after Mark's breathing had evened out into a deep sleep. The image of the photograph was burned into my mind. Katya. That's what the name on the back looked like, scrawled in faint pencil. Katya. Who was she? And who, then, was Ludmila? Was Mark adopted? Ludmila was the last person on earth I could imagine choosing to adopt. She spoke of bloodlines and heritage as if they were the only things that mattered. It made no sense. Unless she had no choice. Once I was certain Mark was asleep, I slipped out of bed. The house was bathed in moonlight, every familiar shadow now seeming to hold a sinister secret. I crept back into Ludmila's room, my phone's flashlight casting a weak, dancing beam. The wardrobe loomed in the corner, a silent keeper of truths. I knew I couldn't risk taking the box out again. Instead, my new, frantic energy propelled me elsewhere. I began to search with a different purpose. I wasn't cleaning anymore. I was an archaeologist, digging through the layers of a life I thought I knew. I ran my fingers along the inside of every drawer, checked under the moth-eaten lining of old suitcases, and shook every book, listening for the telltale rustle of a hidden paper. It was in a heavy, leather-bound book of poetry on her bedside table. It felt off balance in my hands. I fanned the pages and my breath caught. The center had been meticulously carved out, creating a small, rectangular hollow, and inside, tied with a faded blue ribbon identical to the one on the lock of hair, was a small bundle of letters. The paper was so thin it was almost translucent. With hands that shook so badly I could barely unfold it, I opened the letter on top. The handwriting was feminine and elegant, the ink a faded brown. It was addressed to Ludmila, and as I read the first few lines, the world fell away completely. "My dearest Ludmila," it began, "I trust you are keeping our arrangement. The money will be sent on the 1st of the month, as always. Your silence is all I ask in return. But I am a mother, and my heart aches. It has been 6 months now. I beg you, please, just one more photograph. I need to see how my little Alexander is growing." Alexander. His name was Alexander. I sat on the floor of that cold, silent room until the first hints of dawn painted the window gray, reading every single letter. The story they told was one of heartbreak and desperation. Katya was the daughter of a powerful party official in the old days. She had fallen in love with a man her family deemed unacceptable, a poet, a dreamer with no connections and no prospects. When she became pregnant, her father gave her an ultimatum: get rid of the child and marry the man he had chosen for her, or be cast out with nothing, her lover's life made unbearable. Terrified and alone, she chose a third path. Ludmila was a distant, impoverished relative, a widow with no children of her own. Katya orchestrated a secret deal. She would fake a late-term miscarriage, go away for a few months, and give her baby to Ludmila to raise as her own. In return, she would send a generous sum of money every month for the rest of her life. It was a desperate, flawed plan born from a mother's terror. The letters were filled with her anguish, her pleas for details about his first steps, his first words, his favorite toys. Each photograph she received was her most treasured possession. For 3 days, the letters and the tin box remained hidden. I watched Mark navigate his grief, a man mourning a woman who had built his entire life on a foundation of lies. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. He would talk about her, small memories of her strictness that he now reframed as a form of love. "She was just trying to make me strong," he'd say, and I would have to bite my tongue until it bled. I couldn't let him mourn a fantasy. He deserved the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I chose a quiet evening. I made tea, sat him down in the living room, a room that now felt like a stage for the final act of a long-running play, and simply placed the tin box on the coffee table between us. I said nothing. He looked at it, confused, then opened it. He picked up the photograph first, his brow furrowed. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I don't know this woman." "Look at the baby, Mark," I whispered. He stared, and I saw the flicker of recognition, the dawning horror in his eyes. He looked from the photo to my face, his expression pleading for me to tell him it was a joke. I gently pushed the bundle of letters toward him. He read for hours. I sat with him, my hand on his back, as his world was dismantled, letter by painful letter. The grief he felt for Ludmila didn't disappear. It twisted into something far more complex. It became a monstrous knot of anger, betrayal, and a profound, hollow sense of loss for a life and a mother he never knew. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear, not with tears, but with a cold, hard resolve. "Alexander," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "My name is Alexander." The last letter in the bundle was dated just 5 years ago. Katya wrote that her husband had passed away and that her father's long shadow was finally gone. She was living alone, and the guilt was eating her alive. She gave a new address in a small town about a 3-hour drive away. "I will wait," she had written. "For the rest of my days, I will simply wait." 2 days later, we were in the car, driving toward that town. The silence was different now. It wasn't the oppressive silence of Ludmila's house. It was a space filled with unspoken anticipation, with fear and with hope. We found the address easily. It was a modest, pretty house with a garden full of blooming roses. Mark, my Alexander, took a deep, shaky breath before he walked up the path and knocked on the door. It opened, and a woman stood there. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes, they were the same kind, smiling eyes from the photograph. She looked at Mark, and her hand flew to her mouth. A choked sob escaped her lips. She didn't say a word. She just looked at the son she had only ever seen in pictures, her face a canvas of disbelief, regret, and a lifetime of love that had never had a place to go. Mark didn't speak either. He just stood there, a 40-year-old man meeting his mother for the very first time. And in that moment, I saw the last of Ludmila's ghost finally fade from his eyes. Driving home that evening, after hours of tears and stories and explanations, Mark reached over and took my hand. The house we were returning to was no longer his mother's house. It was our home. And for the first time, it felt like we were truly free to begin our lives in it.